Hey everyone, welcome to this special edition of Leading Innovation at Work, the new normal special edition. I'm so excited for today's guest on today's show, Michael Redding, coming to us from, are you still in New Jersey, Michael?
Yes, I am in Sparta, New Jersey.
Sparta, New Jersey. So Michael is the managing director at Agile Oak, and he's also a fellow global member of the global IFMA board with me. And Michael and I have just developed this friendship and great respect for each other. He's such an incredible thought leader, and I'm always watching and following what he's talking about because he is really at the forefront of our industry. Fun fact about Michael is that his daughter Gabby has also appeared in the first season of this podcast. So Michael, congratulations. You're the first father-daughter guests that we've had on the show.
Well, thank you, Lorri. And I hope that I come close to living up to the bar that Gabrielle set. And also, just thank you for inviting me. I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to chat with you. And to spend time with your audience. And thank you and Barbara also for the effort you put into, authoring the new normal. For your listeners that have yet to read it, and I'm sure most of them have, I just thought it offered some really deeply thoughtful reflection on our current times. I know it certainly inspired a lot of my thinking on some of our topics today.
Oh, thank you so much, Michael. We really wanted to put together real life case studies and examples of how we think work is going to change forever. Like with any major event, there's always some sort of cascading impact that happens. And we wanted to really explore that and also get your thoughts on that as well. So thank you so much for being a guest today. I'm really interested to hear from you and your perspective. I mean, Michael, you deal with so many different clients in so many different geographies. I'd love to hear your thoughts as to what you think are the top 3 to 5 things you think are going to be permanently influenced going forward post-COVID.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's certainly a number of things, right? Many of which you covered in your book, and some of it is, feels on the face obvious to people. The way we occupy space, working remotely, how we use Zoom and video calls, the interplay of work and family, which have become much more integrated. As a result of this, and we call it a new normal, but I almost struggle with the term because we're not at any kind of new normal yet, but there's just so many dimensions of our work and our lives and our social interactions that have fundamentally shifted, and I don't think will ever be the same after. But there was one theme I thought really resonated with me actually from your book, and it was buried near the end, right? And there was a little article that called "Kindness is Key," and it was easy to miss it because it was just sort of tucked in at the back. And when I read it, and it really talked about being courteous and being kind to folks, it recalled to me a quote that I heard about remote working. And I've looked on Google to try and find the origin so I could properly attribute it, and I apologize that I can't, but it went that, we're not working from home. For many of us, we are at home during a crisis trying to work, right?
Yeah.
And it's really important to remember that, at the time that we're doing this in the United States, 185,000 people, have died as a result of COVID-19, and more continue to do so. And so it's a little surreal, because for some fortunate few of us, this has been a minor adjustment. You know, we were working remotely anyway before. Our families are healthy, and it's just required, you know, seemingly, you know, a few accommodations, and we've been good to go. But for others, Lorri, this has just required a huge sacrifice. And, you know, I think about some of the people that I've had the opportunity to work with and interact with. You know, one individual, a facility manager in Brooklyn, moved his whole family to Pennsylvania to keep them safe, and is now commuting every day from Pennsylvania to Brooklyn, you know,
Wow.
so he could do his job and keep the family safe. You know, I talked to another individual, and his employer didn't even realize at the time that, you know, his job required him to be present, but he had a family member that was immunocompromised, you know, so actually went and rented another apartment and was living in his apartment apart from his family so he could come to work. And I'm not talking about, you know, a high income professional. I'm talking about someone that, you know, worked in the horticultural field, right? You know, so, you know, just making an enormous sacrifice. And, you know, I talk to people that are dealing with childcare issues and their kids going to school and trying to do remote learning while they're at home. And then, you know, under all of that, you know, there's an undercurrent of layoffs and people wondering if they're going to get hit by the next round. And those many that haven't been laid off are dealing with pay reductions. And so, you know, there's many people who are struggling, and they're making big sacrifices. So they need, well, more than need, they deserve understanding, they deserve compassion, generosity and accommodation from both their employers and their fellow coworkers, frankly. And I think this is important because if we don't understand that, and we don't live by those kind of values, then really the rest of this conversation, you know, probably doesn't have a lot of meaning, right? You know, we have to bear in mind the context of what's happening around us and how very deeply impacted, you know, some members of the workforce are. And there's a lot of folks out there that are holding it in, you know, that are dealing with all these things, that have family members that are suffering, that have family members that have passed away and they haven't been able to grieve. But, you know, they show up on a Zoom call with us, and they do their job, and the face that they present, you know, looks okay, but it's not, right? So I think, you know, if people read one chapter of your book, I mean, I hope they come back and read that chapter about kindness is key, you know, because to me, it undergirds everything else that we do as we adapt to this new way of being, you know, for sure.
I wish I could give you a high five right now, or an air five, or a high elbow five, or whatever we call it now, because, you know, the way you said that was so thoughtful. And one of the things I'm so grateful, you know, about the last few months is that we have elevated the discussion around mental health in the workplace. And I think it was always a bit of a subcurrent, but because it's become such a common theme that has impacted all of us having to work remote, it's not like we've adopted mobility. We've been forced to do that because of an epidemic. I think that is a really important thing. I think we will carry forward, to your point. And I think all of us, you know, extending some level of kindness. I'll never take for granted seeing my colleagues in person again. And I'm so grateful when I do have those moments in person. I won't be on my phone, I won't be working on my computer, I'll be present and looking at them. And I think that, you know, we spend a lot of time with our coworkers, sometimes even more than our families, you know, with our work day. You know, we spend 8 to 9 hours at work at least each day. And I think people at work are like our extended family members. So showing compassion to them, understanding what they're going through and their struggles, homeschooling, fear of sickness, their families have been impacted. I think all of us can play a leadership role in kindness. And you just said it so well, Mike. I thank you for underlining that particular comment.
Yeah, well, it's so important, right? And that, I think, is what underlies the human connection. It's interesting. I think even about a video call, like we're doing now, right? And how these calls have changed in many cases, because prior to February and March, we might have been doing this for an hour or two a day, and it was always sort of down to business and here we go, right? But I find now, at least the organizations that do it well, the human factor has been much more, I won't say reintroduced, but it's introduced for the first time, into video conferencing, right? I mean, it used to be, right, that when you were dialing in from home, we did everything we could to manage the impression that we were working from an office. As if almost it was like a little dirty secret that our office was at home, because otherwise we felt unprofessional.
Yeah.
But that's changed, right? Because now we're open about working from home, right? And so since COVID, in the course of business meetings, I've sung happy birthday to a 10-year-old. I've learned about people's guitar collections, their Peloton obsessions, and seen some really interesting home decorating recommendations, right? I mean, I still remember one call, like it was yesterday, where someone said, hey, Jason, your lamp would look really good in Jennifer's living room, and, could you just sort of hand it over to her, right? Those moments have really got me thinking about all the different clients that I work with, and the very different cultures that have evolved for video conferencing, right? Simple things like, are cameras on for the entire meeting? Are they on for the introductions and then off for the meetings, or are the cameras off all the time, right? And so what really makes a great video conference in a setting where people are on calls for 6 to 8 hours a day or more, right? A few things kind of emerged for me on that, right? And one, I mean, it sounds so obvious, but please don't schedule the calls for full hours, right? Because people get fatigued and they need stretch and hygiene breaks, and if they're not provided, they're not accommodated, people are taking them anyway, right? It's like, oh, my camera's going to be off for a minute. Well, because they're human. There's things they need to do, right? And so simple things like either start at 10 minutes after the hour or end 10 minutes before, which is actually tougher because it's hard to maintain the discipline of ending the meeting early, but allowing for that human factor. Or be intentional about allowing 5 to 10 minutes of informal time for people to connect at the start of a call, right? And that sort of fills the void that you talked about, not being able to connect to people. But, when we're in the office, we don't start and stop meetings every hour on the hour. We walk between, we walk and talk with folks, we grab a coffee, so, bake that into the first 5 or 10 minutes of a meeting. Everyone set up, have a coffee. How are you doing? How was your day? Because, that's part of the human connection that we all need. And then, encourage, but don't force. That's important. Encourage people to keep their cameras on because it creates that better sense of connection and engagement. And the reason I say don't force it, is because some people have awkward home situations. They feel very self-conscious, if they don't have a nice office set up or they're dealing with, whatever accommodation it is. These things are important. It serves that essential business purpose of, I think replacing some of those informal conversations and ideation that occur through the casual collisions in the workplace that we're now missing, right? And sometimes it's that chance to say, hey, before the meeting, did you have a chance to think about that, project we were discussing the other day? And it's, oh yeah, I did. I've got these great ideas. Let's you and I schedule some time for that later in the day, right? That doesn't happen if all your interactions are highly structured. We need those unstructured interactions.
I love your suggestion of the first 10 minutes of the meeting or the last 10 minutes of the meeting designated for that rapport and exchange, right? Because we do tend to be fairly utilitarian when we book those meetings, or at least those teleconferences in the past, right?
Yeah, and that was fine when we were doing 2 or 3 a day, but not when every work interaction, right? That model doesn't extend to an 80 to 100%, telecon time. And then finally, recognize and help people when they have a bad setup, where, bad lightings and camera angles and things, not because it looks a little weird, there was a great SNL skit on it, right? Saturday Night Live skit. I'm not going to try and repeat it because it just won't be as funny if I do it, but you can look it up on YouTube. But, it's important to kind of reach out and help people because it hinders their ability to engage and contribute, right? I've been in calls where I've been looking at the top of people's heads, or they look like that old, where's Kirby meme, and you sort of see them from the, but, it can be kind of funny in the moment, but actually it's a barrier to engagement and communication. And if this is our new normal, we need to just help and point those things out to people. And I think it also speaks to a broader conversation about how do we properly support people from home, in this quote new normal, and what is the future of FM, right?
Yes.
So
yeah. Well, I think we still are wondering around, with all this remote work, how that's going to impact facilities management professionals, real estate professionals that are in the office. And I am starting to see a lot of organizations rationalize the amount of space that they need. If they had any reticence before around mobility strategies, they've been living in an experiment for the last 6 months that's demonstrated to them that people can be productive. And I think people are getting a lot more comfortable with things like video. Like I know myself, I don't think I could ever just go back to a boring old 2-dimensional conference call. I really like the ability to see video. I don't mind, some of the, kids on the lap every now and again. My own dog has been a celebrity in several of the webinars that I've given. Just at that moment, she wants up. She doesn't know that I'm recording a webinar, but I think we're getting a lot more accustomed to that, and it's becoming a lot more mainstream. And I don't think I could ever go back. It feels like you're cutting off one of your senses, I think, just to go back to a teleconference. So I'm tolerant to some of the, idiosyncrasies that come along with video.
Yeah, well, so here's the thing, right? And, I've seen one of our clients go from, and interestingly, they're a tech company, right? So you would think that they, are very comfortable with video and remote working. And they're very comfortable with the video because they had it in all their conference rooms, but their offices ran, 98+% occupancy because their culture was you show up at the workplace to work, you don't work from home, right? And now they're 4% occupancy, Lorri. And so it's been this huge cultural shift and huge learning for them, notwithstanding the fact that, they're rather expert at actually enabling, great video conferencing. And so, look, there's a temptation, for companies go, well, what a great opportunity for savings and efficiency, right? And we think, well, okay, for an office worker, just on real estate costs, we might spend 10 to 15K a year, just on office space, and then several thousand more, obviously, for technology, amenities, and various other services to help people be productive and effective, right? But for work from home employees, what do? We provide a laptop, a cell phone, and if they're lucky, they get a modest allowance to buy a nice monitor and a crappy office chair. Quite honestly, right? I haven't seen anyone working from home on an Arion, right? So, and your book, it actually, had a couple articles on this, right? The elaborate home office, and we all need better ergonomics, when we're working from home. And these articles are right on point. And for people that are professionals with dedicated home office space or are otherwise situated to work effectively from home, people like you and I, right? And we have good setups. That's all we ever need or wanted. And the little guide, okay, make sure the desk height, and you're good to go, right? But for others, right, in an environment where we don't have 10 or 20% of people working from home, but where we got 90+% people working from home, that's not the case, right? They were compelled to work from home. They don't have the space and they don't have the equipment to do it well. So telling them to have good lighting and good ergonomics doesn't get them where they need to be, right? And so some of the other things I've seen, and you have too, I'm sure, Lorri, is people working in their living room while their family is swirling all around them, right? I've seen people tucked away in little nooks and crannies of their apartment or their house and, trying to cover one ear, because the kids are in the background or they're in their garage. In fact, I had one client who created a home office in his work shed, right? Now, okay, that said, it was a little rough at first, but honestly, over the summer, it's become progressively nicer and nicer. And so I used to laugh, and now I'm kind of envious, I'm thinking, a shed might be for me too, right? But
I have seen several garages in a number of conference calls. It's funny you say that, or people, they don't have room in the house, or their kids are all home. There isn't a quiet spot that they can carve out, so they're in their garage.
Right, and so you get my point, right?
Yeah,
in some cases, people are working with horrible lighting and horrible acoustics and horrible ergonomics, and it's not easily fixed, and it is not sustainable, right? And so it's unrealistic, I think, for companies to say, hey, I'm going to grab 10 to 20K a year in annual rent savings and just expect my employees to soldier on the way they are right now. In my opinion, that's just a...
You bring up a really good point, and I think a lot of, some of the articles written on it have been a little bit salacious, death of the office, really big claims like that. But there is a huge
Right.
demographic of people that can't work from home. Either they don't have the physical setup. Imagine being in New York in a small apartment with a number of roommates trying to work remote. Imagine being early in your career. Remember all the benefit we would get from osmosis, just being around those really amazing thought leaders inside our office. There is a huge contingency of people that can't work remote. So, but I think there's paradigms that it's an all or nothing. I think that there will always be a contingency of people that need to go to the office. But I think what we're talking about in this next iteration is the ability for organizations to use and leverage much more aggressive mobility strategies for those employees that are able to function productively. It's all around productivity, and that's a very personal topic, as you know. But I think for the most part, a lot of organizations were a bit reticent. Like, I loved what you said at the beginning. It's almost like a dirty secret you were working at home. It's really out in the open now. And I think that now there are a lot more tolerant of it. We can leverage those strategies a lot more aggressively, but it doesn't mean that you give up 100% of the office and go virtual. So there's some middle ground, I think.
Well, and I think I think that is absolutely correct, Lorri. There is going to be some level of rebound, right? And in parallel to that, we absolutely must think about how we invest in people working from home, because, work from home in many ways is sort of being a free ride for the employer, right? And so I start thinking about, well, okay, what does that investment look like, right? It could be in-home ergonomic evaluations. And it's going to be very specific to the individual situation. There's obvious things like chairs, desks, lighting, technology, equipment. Maybe there's some capital investment in people's home workspace. Or maybe we think about a $500 or $1,000 a month allowance to enable people to buy or rent more work-friendly accommodation, right? I mean, some of that savings got to be reinvested. I mean, for 10 to 15K, you could probably drop a furnished shed, like a portable office, in someone's backyard. Now, that's probably a pretty limited solution. The number of folks could accommodate that. Or park a Sprinter van converted to home office function in someone's apartment building lot. We just need to be creative, and we need to think about our office services and amenities differently, right? So, instead of childcare, maybe it's tutoring and babysitting, right? Or instead of a gym membership, it's Peloton or other connected equipment. We go from a cafeteria benefits to Uber Eats, or a home nurse that's doing family health checks. And we can debate and agree or disagree about what's practical and what isn't. But the point is, I think that, we need to be intentional and open-minded, because I think there's a universe of potential solutions and possibilities. And I think this is going to be the new workplace differentiation. And we need to be creative solutioning for it, but recognize, the narrative I hear is all the savings. We have to recognize that there's going to be a level of investment that needs to be made if we're going to replace some or all of the office on a permanent basis, and not just for those employees that were always predisposed to work remotely, but for employees who, now have it thrust upon them, but never really had considered it as a work or a lifestyle choice, right? It's very different experience, for someone predisposed as compared to someone for whom it is thrust upon. And for the service providers, right? I think it's, we've had the conversation in the past about whether it's facility management or workplace services or employee experience. And now we need to make that leap, right? Because, we're at this time of just massive social and economic disruption. And this level of disruption upends marketplaces, right? It shuffles the deck, right? So when I think about facility management right now, as an industry, it's like we're building ocean liners, but Lorri, we're at the dawn of the jet age, right? And so it's time for the providers to truly embrace the fact that they're in the workplace services business, and that home is becoming and will remain a predominant workspace, right? And I believe that the firms that bring truly fresh solutions to the marketplace are going to be the winners, right? And it's going to be integrated office plus flex plus home solutions, and that those that can't nail all three, quite honestly, I think they're going to be sitting on the riverbank watching the world go by. And that's going to happen quickly, Lorri.
I think so too. And, you know, before COVID hit, we did see a huge groundswell towards employee experience. And really, you know, as real estate professionals, I was interacting a lot more with HR, and everything was really starting to converge. And I think a couple of years ago, we made the switch. Instead of it being about buildings, it was about how we enable the occupants of those buildings. It's the employees that work in those buildings, a very human-centered approach to how we're doing facilities related services or workplace services. And that was popping up in amenities and things like that. I could not agree with you more, Michael. I think that we're really going to slingshot forward to really talk about how we enable humans with technology, with convenience, with productivity, wherever they choose to work. And I really do see that as being a big disruptor for our traditional profession. I couldn't agree with you more. It's very astute.
And, you know, innovation, Lorri, it requires a willingness to try things and a willingness to fail, right? You know, whenever we see massive disruption, you know, and you know, we've lived through disruption in our own time. You know, we always see ideas that don't work, right? You know, the cell phone concepts that never took off, right? The mobile solutions that never took off. You know, the Betamax versus the VCR, if we go back far enough, right?
I'm far too young to remember that, Michael. Far too young.
well, of course, but you can look it up on YouTube. But look, the point of it is that you know, we've moved from a time of incremental continuous improvement to a time of disruption and reinvention. And so the things that made us successful, that sorted the winners from the losers in the last 10 years, and the cultures that enabled it, are not the cultures that will enable our success going forward, right? You know, we have to be willing to try new things and to recognize that, you know, we may have to have 2 or 3 or 4 failed service offerings, you know, for each one that takes off. But the ones that do take off, you know, have the potential to redefine our business, right? So creativity, flexibility, entrepreneurialism, you know, they're going to be the watchwords. And it's going to be a challenge for the larger firms, you know, because it's hard to pivot away from the things that you know, made you successful and made business leaders wealthy, right? But you know, it's like being a newspaper publisher in 1999. You know, they're making money hand over fist, and you know, the internet was upon them, and you know, it didn't seem like there was a reason to change until it was too late, and some of the firms went under, right? And this, I believe, we are at the same type of momentous moment, you know, in the facility and real estate business. And, you know, it's going to be very easy to be seduced by what made us successful in the past. But I believe that the firms that do will be drastically undercut in the future.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that there has been a lot of disruption, arrows pointed at the real estate industry for a number of years, well, whether it be technology or otherwise. And I think that it is only going to accelerate in the next 5 years. We've got, and it's interesting because there's a lot of institutional practices in the way that we operate in real estate. And I completely agree with you. I think we're, you know, between distributed workforce, gig economy, as well as technology options, we're really, it'll be really interesting to see where service providers and just organizations are even 5 years from now, which isn't that far away. And I think your comments are completely astute. And I think if anything, it's going to speed up. Before we were talking about maybe a 5 to 10 year horizon. I think we're looking at under 5 years now, Michael, for sure.
Yeah, and we're going to see, and your book certainly acknowledged that, a convergence of industries and technologies that impact our view of workspace, right? So,
Yeah.
The new Mercedes-Benz S-Class, for example, will be the first of 2021 to have level 3 autonomous driving, which means in most cases it will operate quite satisfactorily with the driver's hands off the controls. At speeds of up to 60 kilometers an hour, I think is the threshold for that. Right now, is that a fully autonomous, all-weather, fully capable machine? No, but clearly we're on that journey, right? Well, you get to the point when you get to level 5 autonomy that suddenly you don't need a cockpit anymore, right? And you can fundamentally redesign a vehicle interior. And the thought was, well, it can become a productive space on the way to work or from work, right? But if you actually think about it, the vehicle could also become the home office in that type of setting. Will it? I don't know. You don't know. None of us know, right? But this is the space in which we have to be thinking about the future of work, the future of services, and as providers, where we need to be ready to deliver. And if we're not imagining, scenarios that feel like they're out there, we're going to miss the opportunity, right? Years ago, the folks at Blockbuster never imagined that video on demand would be the dominant model, because it just seemed, when we tried to do video on the internet 20 years ago, it was like grainy VGA in a little window, and it was sort of a novelty, but you couldn't imagine sitting home and having a cinematic experience. And now, my kids can't imagine it being any other way, right? So we have to be thinking about the fantastic, and then planning for that, because that's what's coming our way, and I think this is just accelerating that journey, Lorri.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think we're accelerating into the future, and we're living the experiment of it now. Michael, every time we chat, I always feel so enlightened, and I could just talk to you forever. I think the only difference today is we're on Zoom. We don't have martinis in front of us, but I always enjoy our conversations, and I always learn something every single time I speak with you. And just given your discussion around cars and being another form of workplace, I'd love to invite you back in the future, back to the future in a future podcast to talk about that as a separate topic, because Barb and I are researching for our next book right now, which is the 21 disruptions that will affect real estate in the future. And that is actually one of them. So we'll talk more in the future. But every time we chat, I learn something, and I thank you so much for being a guest today. If people want to get in contact with you directly, how could they do that, Michael?
Well, I'm always pleased to chat with your audience. They can, of course, hit me up on LinkedIn. Just include a message saying you saw me on Lorri's podcast, right? And I'll be thrilled to accept your invitation. Or they can get me at my email, which is mredding, MREDDING, at Agile Oak. That's AGILEOAK.com, and I'm thrilled to connect and chat with people and exchange ideas with your audience. And of course, we're in the advisory business, so we're happy to roll up our sleeves with you as well, and talk about how we prepare for the future. And I hope Lorri, if people take one thing out of our conversation today, it's to remember that some of our coworkers, some people are just dealing with very tough circumstances. So be kind, be generous, be accommodating. You can really make a difference for someone when you do.
I can't say it any better than that, Michael. Thank you so much for being such a great guest on the show today. Please, everyone, pay it forward. Just as Michael said, if you know an essential worker or a colleague, please reach out and do something kind for them. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you on the other side.